But essentially, we're really excited to have you joining us here today. We are going to be talking about right-sizing your organization. So that will include a number of different pieces, but we really wanted to talk to the spectrum of where different businesses could be at in their journey of growing, getting smaller, or staying the same. So we'll be covering those things today. And on the call, you have myself. I'm the country manager for Canada, so I'm expanding MyHR into Canada and having a great time doing it. My background is in tourism and hospitality and some professional services HR. I've been at it for quite a long time now, and I'm really enjoying my new role. We meeting lots of new businesses in Canada that are using MyHR for their outsourced HR solutions. So very exciting. Karen, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Julie. Yes, I'm Karen Gould from K3 Human Resources. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. But like Julie, I've spent a long time in the HR world, working in both senior roles and most recently as an external consultant, specialising in change management and then complex employment relations. And so at our K3 Human Resources, we business partner alongside MyHR, supporting the offering and working with SMEs across a range of industries and organisations and backgrounds, helping to ensure they have sustainable organisations.
Amazing. And we're lucky to have Tristan joining us as well. So Tristan heads up the advisory team in MyHR New Zealand. So Tristan, you want to say a quick hi?
Hi, everyone. I work closely with Karen and the team at K3 in terms of where our service offering is the remote support. We are very grateful to have K3 come in and help in the face-to-face facilitation of conversations and consultation processes. Thank you, Karen.
Awesome. And last but not least, we have Nicole Karianis, who is our new country manager in Australia. I'll be able to stop saying new soon, Nicole. You've been here for a little while now. Do you want to say hello, Nicole?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I am the Julie for Australia, based in Sydney. I've been here about 3 months now, but please keep calling me new because I can blame my innocence and ignorance on being new. Hopefully, I can still stretch that out for a little bit longer. My background is in different sectors and different sizes, all the way from banking and finance, healthcare, disability care, and more recently in the last 5 years in the tech space. So like you, Julie, I'm loving this role. It's very, very exciting. Thanks for having me today.
Great. So Karen and I will be walking you through sort of the content that we prepared today. We plan to spend sort of 35 minutes on content, and then we will be opening it up to question and answer. And that's why we have such a range of people here for question and answer, because obviously, when it comes to downsizing your organization, the legal requirements in Australia, New Zealand, and Canada are different. So if there are questions related to that, we will answer it based on our own areas of expertise, and any other general questions we'll just toss up on those on who gets to answer them. So awesome. So to start us off, Karen's going to run through our agenda for today.
So as Julie referred to, we're going to focus on 3 key areas. So first of all, how do we make strategic people resourcing decisions during times of growth? How do we keep our team motivated during steady states? And how do we manage the legal, operational, and human implications of reducing headcount? So in each of these 3 types of business states, there are different strategies that we're going to use and employ to make sure that we're keeping our team motivated, keeping our business sustainable, and that we're doing the right things we have from an obligations and legal perspective. And then we'll have that chance to have the questions and answers when you've got anything specific you want to raise. And there may be a question that you raise during the webinar that Tristan will raise as the slides come up. So feel free to please put your questions in as we go. One thing we do ask is that as you are asking questions, please let us know what country you're from so that we can make sure we give an appropriate answer.
We're so global, aren't we? Look at us, like, a whole bunch of different continents covered. Thanks, Karen. That sounds great. Fantastic. So when we were sort of putting this together, we really broke the businesses out into those three categories, right? Of growth, getting smaller or staying the same. Realistically, if you were to look at some of the indicators of your business, it rarely looks like that steady line up or that steady line down. You're going to see much more variability. And we're going to talk about, a little bit about those patterns and the data. And once you know kind of where you're at, just really thinking about it. But just wanted to be, aware that there is some variability through how a business grows and changes. And I think if anything, what we want you to be looking at is the overall direction your business is heading in, and also just keeping an eye on it, right? On where your business is at, and having that critical lens, taking that moment to stop and think, how are things going? What people resources do I need? Am I over-resourced? All those types of things. We're going to talk about that throughout, and it really is taking that step back. So, even today, as you're listening to the slides, don't be afraid to jot a few notes down and go, oh, yeah, okay, I think that is me, and pay attention to that kind of thing. Great.
Let's start with growth, and to kick us off, I'm going to ask Julie a question. Julie, what do you think are some of the key indicators of growth?
Yeah, I think growth can be a really exciting time with a business. And some key indicators I see when I see businesses in a period of growth, you start to see employees that are struggling to keep up. So they're really, really busy all the time. They're struggling to keep up. Sometimes you can start to see things wane a little bit with the customer service your business is providing. So you might be getting some feedback that the customer service hasn't been as good as it always was. Another option for growth is actually having to turn work away. So we see this with lots of our contracting businesses, landscaping companies or arborists or construction, where they're actually having to turn work away. I think that's a really great indicator. And another thing to really watch for is burnout with your employees. So that can be symptomatic of the work, needing to streamline some of the work or needing to put some processes in place, but it can actually just be symptomatic of not having enough headcount to match and seeing that growth there. So those are some kind of key indicators that I like to think about, or I hear coming from our clients when they're talking to us about being ready to hire or growing.
Thanks, Julie. I think what Julie is indicating is that what is the valuable data that we have? What's the information that we have available that helps us to do some of these assessments around where the state of our organisation is at? And so it's really important to pull out these indicators and do some assessment, also diagnosis with them. Having a look backwards to go, what information do I have from the recent past? What's happening right now in the present? And then also, what do we expect for the future? So, what is happening in terms of trends in the market? What is happening for our customers and brand and market share? What is happening potentially from a people perspective? So there's lots of obviously changes in regulation around visas, immigration, all those type of things that may affect the people that we can access and the capabilities that we can access. So really dive deep into those indicators, into the data and information you have available, and do a little diagnostic that helps you address past, present, and future, and takes into account a really rounded view of across your finances, across your customer, across your operations, and across your people.
Yeah, awesome. Fantastic. I really like that kind of diagnosis, that taking a moment and looking back there. Great, Karen. What do we do next after we've done the diagnosis and we really know that we are growing?
From there, the important part is to be able to go, where am I going to invest my resource? Making sure we're investing resource in the right time, the right place, and that we're getting the maximum value out of it. So one little tool that comes from Alignal Solutions that you can use is categorizing your business activities into these four buckets that you can see up here on the screen. So the first one is around competitive or unique activities. So this is about what makes your business stand out from other organizations. Is it the service, the product that you're offering, or is it maybe about more the how you'll go about that delivery? What makes you special, and how is that different to how other organisations may be doing it? The second bucket, if you like, is around competitive enabling activities. So then looking at what supports us to be able to do those competitive or unique activities. So it might be the infrastructure, tools, and capabilities. And it's going, okay, so this enables us to achieve that competitive edge. We then also look at the categories of compliance. So what do we have to do because of the market that we're in? It might be regulatory standards, might be New Zealand or international legislation. It might be a dynamic of your industry that you need to be looking at, but what do we have to do? So a great example of this might be health and safety. And the last category there is necessary. So those everyday things that you do to make your business run smoothly. For example, administration and transactional activities. They may not be adding a whole lot of value, but if they don't get done, then they can cause trouble. Once you know where your activities fit into each of these 4 buckets, then you can apply a resourcing strategy to those activities. So those things that are unique, you're going to want to make sure that you can resource those, protect those, and grow those. Those things that enable it have to be able to be scaled as you grow. Those things that are compliant, you want them to take up the least amount of time that creates rework or inefficiencies. So how do you streamline those or systemize them? And those necessary activities, can you automate them? Can you outsource them? Can you do other things that actually and make sure that that's not where your time investment is happening?
Yeah, and Karen, I think I really like that idea of kind of looking at the different activities. And one thing I always recommend is people actually record their activities, right? So, we often say, "Oh, I'm so busy, I'm so busy, I'm overwhelmed," or you might have an employee, like an office employee manager saying, "I'm so busy, I'm so overwhelmed." And it's not until we actually write down every day, and it sounds like a really manual kind of simplistic approach, but I've seen it work so well so many times. Just keeping that notebook open, doing it for a week, and really writing down what activities are being done. Because without that list or that real clarity on where all your time is going, it's difficult to know where to add that resource. And once you have real clarity on the work that's being done, it can be really helpful to figure out which of these boxes it actually fits in. Like, what do you want to enhance more? How do you get the competitive activities, more of those? And how do we get rid of some of the operational tasks or streamline some of those pieces? So yeah, I found that is a simplistic but easy way to support some kind of investigation there.
We don't want growth for growth's sake. We want strategic growth. We want growth that adds value to our businesses and to our
Yeah,
organizations. Yeah, absolutely.
exactly.
Once you've got that and you go, okay, well, I now know where we're spending our time and where we want to spend our time and what kind of activities we want to do in each space, then we can think about our organizational design and what roles we might need. And there's a couple of little things here that, from experience, are potentially worth highlighting. That's the first one's around leadership. So as organizations grow, quite often there may be an extra layer of leadership or supervision. So the owner or the manager of the business can't manage every person in the organization anymore. And so it's really important that if someone is coming into a leadership role, that they have similar values, similar concepts around what leadership looks like. They've got working towards similar outcomes. And for that reason, getting clarity around accountabilities. So RASCI might be a good tool for how you might do that. To be clear on who is doing what. So there's not confusion for either the business managers or owners, the leaders who come in, or the team themselves. It's also really important to think about, well, specialist functions don't always have to be in-house. So we might go, well, we've got this strategic element that we do have to be able to address, but is it right to have a permanent person fill that role, permanent role itself, or do I actually need a particular skill set this time that might actually have a finite period? So for example, it may be a project that the implementation phase versus the business as usual phase look quite different. And so being able to match the resource for the time needs as well. And also then thinking about, for example, when we talk about some of those activities like health and safety, or we talk about activities like whether it's payroll, do I need external contractors, or for things like supporting the scalability, do I need a service like MyHR offers? And in each of the different areas of the business, how do I leverage those internal versus external resources as well?
Oh,
And
awesome.
lastly, just around scalability, is remembering that we're trying to scale growth, and we're trying to do that where it adds the most value. So keeping that focus on what does enable that growth.
Fantastic. Awesome.
Now, a couple other little points I just would like to point out as well is there's a great concept that we both credit back to Alignor as well, and it's this cube. So for those of you who had a Rubik cube as a child, you would know the frustrations of being able to match all the different sides up and get all the colours all aligned up. My nephew is able to do this in 5 seconds flat, and it still baffles me even to today. But the concept here is that when you change one side, you change the other. You can't change one without affecting something else. And so when we look at change, it can't just be a conversation about the structure and the roles. It has to be a conversation about all the parts that interplay. And so keeping in mind that as we grow our structure, our people, we also have to grow our systems and processes that support that. We have to still be able to maintain what works well about our culture that we want to keep going. And that means codifying it, understanding what it is, unpacking that, and being able to repeat that. We have to be able to make sure people can stay focused on the bigger picture. We've all heard of change fatigue, I'm sure, where people just see these constant changes and feel like it's, a bit overwhelming. So keeping them focused on a goal that's longer term, and so that they can see where it's heading. And then talent acquisition and retention are time consuming, but they add such a substantial amount of value to our organisation. It's important we've got the knowledge about what attracts people to us and what keeps them with us, and that we're doing deliberate things to enhance that.
Amazing. I love, there's just so many gems there, Karen, and really, some real thought, real thinking work to be done there, like in looking at that data and thinking about it. So I think that's a really nice roadmap that you've presented for growth. And on the next slide, we have like a quick example that you can give us where you've seen people do some really good examples of that. But we will send the slides out. So if you are in a period of growth, you'll be able to kind of look back through and consider what Karen shared here. So Karen, just your example here.
I won't go into a lot of detail about this, but this is an example of a company called Vend. Vend was actually founded in New Zealand in 2010 and was bought by Lightspeed in 2021 for a significant sum of money. And this is just a little bit of detail around how they use some of these strategies to be able to achieve the successes that they achieved. Just making sure that they were really focused on what made them that core difference to their competitors, and how they leveraged that, and then how they partnered with other organizations that weren't in that core space so that their time was utilized in the best possible way.
Amazing. Fantastic. So let's talk a little bit about, we're going to move on to chat a little bit about a steady state, right? So a business that's in a steady state. And Karen, I'll let you kind of answer this question as a lead into the steady state conversation. What do you think you need to watch during a period of a steady state for a business?
Yeah, I think my biggest call out is to sometimes it's easy to become a little bit complacent during a steady state, and we have to be careful that staying steady doesn't mean actually going backwards, because we do need to be thinking about continuous improvement, adapting to change, and staying relevant to our customers, staying relevant to our people. So in any steady state, we're still going to have a potential inflation or rising costs. We're potentially going to have competitive movement. changing customer expectations, technology. Look what's happened in AI in just the last couple of years alone, and how that's changed the landscape of how we might do things within our organisation, but how customers expect us to interact with them as well. And that all leads to things like brand perception. So my thing around a steady state would be keep checking in to make sure that things are steady, and just checking around what's changed, and have a continuous growth mindset regardless.
Absolutely. It sort of makes me think about this one client we met at we went to a trade show for ski industries, small ski industries in Canada. Obviously, there's quite a lot of them, and we ran into this one HR professional, and she said, I really looked around and I realized that although we've been repeating play every year and kind of doing the same things, we're actually falling behind. So, technology is advancing, what employees are looking for is changing. And although we're just in a steady state, or we thought we were in a steady state, we're falling behind. So I thought that was a really interesting, sort of piece of like, if you're not staying up to date, it doesn't have to be just about growth, but there is something about staying up with what's going on and staying focused on your business, so you don't see that, that decline when you're not looking, sort of thing. So I like to think about, in a steady state, you still almost more so want to be focusing on those goals and objectives. What are you trying to accomplish? What is it that's going to keep things exciting for the employees, right? There are some businesses that are very much, they repeat, they're kind of very similar, a similar number of clients. Something comes to mind for me would be a clinic or a doctor's office. There's so many hours where you're going to actually see patients, right, without adding more doctors or more things. But there's still a lot of opportunity to engage your employees with what kind of customer service are you trying to deliver. What do your employees want to learn, and what new technologies can be bought in, to make the business more interesting. I think in a steady state, developing culture rituals, events, recognition, ways of working are all really important. We did another webinar on culture and had a lot of participants in that webinar. So, just what are those ideas around how do we still make work engaging and fun, even if we're not growing? Because there is a certain sort of energy that growth brings. Yeah, and like I said, sort of staying still without losing ground. And that goes right through to the idea of, your staffing levels and needs, right? So one thing that I sometimes see is, we're bringing in enhanced technology that actually changes the type of work that employees are doing and the number of employees that you need. And how does that advanced technology actually impact your customers? So being really clear on that, making sure you're asking your employees for feedback on that, making sure you're considering the increased technology and how that affects the business, right? Sometimes I see, with steady state, when I see turnover happen, I see there's just an automatic decision to replace the role with the same person, right? So not even thinking about it, we just repost the role, we fill the role with the same person, and then you get what you've got. But sometimes you don't even need that person, and some of that analysis that you were speaking out before, Karen, I think can be really relevant even in a steady state, right? You don't have to be growing to be keeping your eye on your business and understanding, where you want to put your resource, right?
I agree.
Especially,
It's about
if you
awareness,
have
isn't it?
sorry, what was that, Karen?
It's about awareness, isn't it? It's about
Yeah,
keeping
it really
eyes
is about
open.
awareness. Yeah, it is about awareness. And particularly, you might be like, oh, everybody's happy here. Yeah, no one wants nothing different. But do you really know that, right? Have you had those conversations with your employees? Are you clear on what the objectives are of your employees? You might have someone in a management position leave, and you go to replace that management position. But really, what you want to be looking at is lower down in your organization, are you succession planning people into those roles, right? We make a lot of assumptions about, what people want and how comfortable they might be, or, oh, they're just happy to show up every day and do their job. But I really would encourage you to check in about those. You know, the example I have for sustainable growth would be a digital marketing agency that we're working with. They've probably grown maybe one person a year over the last sort of 5 years, so not massive growth in any way. They're very clear that they don't want more than 20 employees. They feel like that's a really good number of people to manage. And where their growth and excitement comes from is mastering the new technologies, staying on top of the AI changes, and being real leaders in their industry. So they're quite selective on the type of clients they take on because they have a real niche industry, right, in the adventure space. And one thing that when they took on MyHR, they were really excited to use that performance module, right? And they went with objectives and key results, and they really nailed down those objectives and key results for their employees, getting really clear on what are they trying to do each year and how do they keep their people engaged in that. So really interesting need case there. It wasn't about growth. It wasn't about quick hiring. It was more about ongoing continuous engagement. You know, they do a learning summit every year where they bring everyone together and connect the team. So just a different look and feel of the business. And a good example, I think, of, you know, keeping your finger on the pulse of the business and figuring out where people are at and what people want in the business. So yeah, I think that's a great example. Great. So we're talking a little bit about our final piece, and probably where we get most of the questions is when we come into downsizing, because it can be a really stressful time, how to downsize effectively. And often downsizing sort of comes about because of a downturn in the economy or less work coming in. So I think you were supposed to introduce this, Karen, and I just took
It's
that
all
away.
good.
Sorry about
But it's true, it's organisations face challenges, and it does mean, unfortunately, there are times when we make decisions that we do need to downsize, and that could be an aspect of the organisation or across the board. So, for example, if technology changes, there may be a certain skill set that influences, and it's you know, set to a particular area of the business, and otherwise it's more broad when there's things like recession or, you know, times when finances can be very, very tight. And whilst downsizing isn't something that is a preference, when it is a necessity for the organisation to be sustainable, then it is something that we need to sit back and reflect on and make decisions in a timely manner. So, Julie, I'll go back to the question I asked you earlier, which is, what are those indicators?
Yeah, I think the indicators of, you know, the need to downsize, they're very much coming from your data as well. So there's often lots of financial indicators that you need to downsize. Obviously, the cost of labor in almost any business is one of the highest costs you have. So, you know, when the finances aren't looking strong, that is often a place to look. I find even if the business is really robust financially, having employees with extra time on their hands can be challenging in itself. So you start to see some disruptive behaviors. You might start to see turnover because people don't feel like coming into work, there's much purpose for them coming into work. So even if you can afford it, I don't recommend having extra employees kicking around. It's not a great positive employee experience, and it does lead to some negative behaviors. You know, if you notice that your team is coping really well when people are away, then maybe you don't need as many people as you have. So some of those types of things, I would say. And just generally, often you can see down the pipe if you see a contract that's not going to be renewed, or you're finishing a construction project, you can see it coming to an end and you don't have that filling in below it. And those are the pieces you really want to pay attention to, because the more time you can give and the more space for you have for thoughtful consideration or to try and boost the business, all of that is really, really helpful in terms of the employment contract context, informing and notifying your employees, as well as taking that opportunity to grow the business. So yeah, some key indicators, one of which is definitely the finances coming into the business or the cash flow. What else about downsizing? So Karen, you're going to tell us a little bit. Oh no, am I going to tell you this, or is it you or me, Karen?
Go for it, Julie.
Awesome, right. So when you're thinking about, I kind of alluded to that a little bit there, right? The planning piece. And I just don't think I can reiterate this enough, right? So when you're looking at things changing in the business, or you're hearing of things like, maybe this project's not going to come through, or this not going to happen, right? Considering, you know, starting to get that piece of paper out, and rather than stressing about it, really starting to plan it out, right? What is the reason for the downturn in the business? There's some good questions to ask. Is it possible to mitigate that? Is it a permanent situation or a short-term problem, right? Is it a gap, right, that you just have to fill, and can you fill it? Is it something that happens every year, and your hiring should be based on that, right? That there's an up and down. We do a lot of that in Canada and New Zealand, like those fixed term agreements, right? So moving to those fixed term agreements so that you're not in a tough situation when you do have a downturn, as you're kind of expecting it. Then kind of back to that very beginning slide, we talked about, what areas are you overstaffed in? And sometimes that can actually be your leadership team. And the hardest part there is that those are more difficult conversations to have. And that's when sometimes getting some support from someone like Karen or any of us on the call here can be helpful, because it's, people that you're connected to, people you're attached to, people that have families and lives, and you feel really challenged by that. And sometimes it is a necessary decision. And then, which capabilities does it make sense to lose, right? Where are you not getting the needed results? So this is the idea of like, who are you going to lose from your team, right? And what makes sense there. So it's not the last person in necessarily. I know we tend to think about that as one of the easy ways out. We're like, well, they were hired last. This is the easiest conversation. They're the shortest length of service. That doesn't always, isn't the most strategic decision, right? Where have you had feedback that things aren't working, right? Are there any employees that are kind of done, right? They're not necessarily happy there anymore, or they are asking for work. So, this can be hard questions to ask yourself, but I think that's where you kind of need to dig into your gut a little bit, right? And kind of go with, where do I really need to make that decision? Karen, do
Julie,
you want to
I'll
talk
just
a
add,
little bit?
yeah. Sorry, Julie, I just think I'll just add to that and say that, in terms of these processes, what we're talking about quite simple terms is that they do have, Julie was talking about that you may have long-standing relationships with some of these people, and it is never an easy process. So it may be kind of simple on paper, or it might be quite complex on paper, but it actually is, what we understand is that it often comes with, an emotional toll, and decision-making can be quite difficult. And that's potentially a good thing, that if you are making these decisions and they feel a little bit hard to make, then you're obviously approaching it with a level of empathy that is worthwhile. And, we make the right decisions for the business to be sustainable, so that it can employ people, continue to employ people, and continue to exist and do other benefits for our organisation, but for the community and the people it serves as well. We don't sort of make light of the fact that it's difficult to make some of these decisions. Yeah.
Absolutely. So in terms of the
Hmm.
process in New Zealand, do you want to outline that for us, Karen?
Sure. It's probably one of the more complex legislative environments here in New Zealand for managing changes to roles. In particular, we're going to emphasise the downsizing part here. So potentially where we're thinking about reducing the number of roles we have. I won't go into heaps of detail today, but I will just outline the key steps, which is one of the most important things, first of all, is to really prepare your business case, to be clear around what is not working, why is it not working, so therefore, why do we need to make changes? Making sure that we are focused on the role needs, the business needs, and we're not actually making this about the personal performance. There's other processes that need to happen if it relates to those things. At this stage, New Zealand organisations have to ensure that it is a proposal, so no final decisions have been made. They may have some indication and some proposed outcomes, but they're open to feedback. And so then that's the purpose of consultation with employees. It literally just means presenting that proposal, seeking their feedback, and genuinely considering that feedback before a final decision is made. And there's process steps along the way there where MyHR can help and support that. Decision making then is about ensuring that when you come to final decision, you've got fair and objective and transparent reasons for making decisions, and you can share those back. And I actually recommend that it's not just about sharing that back with those people who are potentially affected, but making sure that actually you're sharing back with a wider group some decisions have been made and why they've been made, so you can make sure that you still have engagement with those people who are remaining in the organisation. That's as critically as important as those people who potentially need to be consulted with because their roles are being impacted. And then lastly, throughout this process, we need to be offering support to people, making sure that along the way, whether that's just listening and giving them opportunity to talk in the ways that suit them, or whether there's additional offerings that the organisation wants to give, that there are support mechanisms. In New Zealand, most employment agreements require us to provide notice to an employee of the end of their day or pay them for that notice period. And then you need to refer to your employment agreements whether there's any redundancy provisions or compensation that also have to be applied.
Nice.
Well rounded
Kristen,
out, Karen.
Yeah.
Thanks, Kristen. This is something you see every day. Is there anything you want to add to that?
I just can't emphasize enough that process is king here. It's really, we've simplified it, but at its core, it is 4 steps, as Karen has outlined and gone over. And if we get those right, we're fine in terms of like the potential ramifications or risks to any process. So please do talk to us if you have a need to start talking to your people.
Fantastic. Awesome. Thank you. And Nicole, you're up.
Thank
Let's talk
you.
about downsizing in Australia.
I hope this doesn't sound like a competition of who has the more complex piece of legislation. And I
We're
hope
gonna
one day
lose
we
for
will
sure.
lose. Yeah, you're winning,
Yeah.
Julie. But team, everything you've just learned, everyone on the call, everything you've just learned on the New Zealand slide, hold on to that because it's all applicable in Australian context as well. Let's just build on it a little bit more. From a Australian perspective, there's a couple of things to think about, especially if your company or organisation and employees are covered by a modern award. So there's usually consultation clauses in your modern award or enterprise agreement if you have one of those and you're on the call. And you need to think about really before you start anything, making sure that you have complied with the consultation clauses or whatever clauses are in those agreements and awards, especially around things like the duration of a consultation period. Is this open for a week? Is this open for 2 weeks? A couple of days? What are we doing here? What's the timeline? What's the project plan? The same thing goes in terms of consultation process, from a consultation letter, time to consider redeployment options. I want to talk about redeployment in a minute. And of course, the final letter, which is a redundancy or a termination letter that says, after the consultation, thanks for your feedback. We've now completed a genuine consultation, and this is a genuine redundancy. Then we're moving to termination. And the same thing applies around, from a payment point of view, making sure that you're complying. There is a national employment standard and various guidance in the legislation around what you are paying for redundancy. That is not applicable for small businesses, i.e. businesses that have less than 15 employees. 15 or more, that's not a small business, and that's probably another webinar for another day. Redeployment just got tricky, and I should have really written here that redeployment just got trickier. So there's been a few interesting Fair Work cases recently. One is around the need to, when you're considering redeployment, to not just look at whether you have vacancies in your permanent or casual workforce, but also whether one of your contractors is doing work that you should have offered that work to the permanent employee that you're about to displace out of their role. There's another fancy word for you. So that's really important to remember. What kind of work are our contractors doing, and is that on an ongoing basis? And should that really be an opportunity for redeployment? The second Fair Work case is that there was a recent ruling whereby redeployment was no longer a comparable redeployment. So really, you have to demonstrate that you've offered it's a bit of an apples and apples situation. You're redeploying me to a position that is similar in pay, similar in seniority, similar in decision-making abilities, and the list goes on. And a recent case found that if you are redeploying me to a role that no longer allows me a flexible arrangement for working from home, and you say, hey, we have this other role, it's less hours, but you have to be in the office for that, that was ruled against the employer. So just remembering that when we have individual flexible arrangements or working from home arrangements, it's not as easy to say a redeployment opportunity is the same, moving from work from home to an in-office setup. So just keep those in mind. The last thing I want to touch on from a downsizing perspective is that in Australia, you need to notify Centrelink or Services Australia if you have made more than 15 employees redundant. It's really a way of a heads up for them in terms of who's going to be applying for, welfare or unemployment payments and so on. So there's an obligation to inform. There's lots of forms and whatnot that we usually help you with as well. And just before I wrap up, Julie, if I may, I just want to talk very briefly to the fact that from a growth, steady state or downsizing perspective, Australia's large enough and diverse enough that we're seeing all three play out. So I really like everything, people on the call, everything you've just heard, that's all applicable from an Australian lens and very important, especially the bit around steady state. And to build on that, if you've hired people promising them a growth, and with the economy and the way things are going, and you're like, hey, promised you this growth, but actually we're in a steady state just trying to survive this economy, are you still the right person for that right role? Is an honest and courageous conversation both employers and employees should be having. And then just very lastly, with your growth or your downsizing or your steady state, you're probably going to find yourself, no matter your size, in different situations in different departments. So some departments are growing, some departments are shrinking, some departments are staying the same. So just to complicate life a little bit more, you'll probably have all three scenarios playing out in your company. And that's tricky, and you need to manage that per how Karen does beautifully outlined and Julie has beautifully outlined, especially if you're, for example, saying, I'm going to recruit a revenue generating role. To get more money, I need to find more customers. I need to recruit more salespeople, but the team next door, no recruitment allowed, or actually I'm going to be downsizing that. So balancing the contradictions and the differences across the business and keeping the morale and the culture going is damn hard. It's a very tough thing to be doing. And look after yourself and look after your people as you do that. Thanks, Julie. Back to you.
No worries. Great. We've got just a couple of slides left. I do want to make sure we have enough time for some question and answer. So we'll go fairly quickly through this. And fortunately for Canada, it's a very simple process, which is kind of surprising because you'd think we'd be the polite and really nice ones, what we're known for here, but we actually don't have to have a consultative process. So we don't check in with the employee. We don't have to check in with the employee and get their feedback. You're actually able to lay an employee off. So two options here. You can lay an employee off completely due to a shortage of work, and you get up to 13 weeks before you have to process that as a termination. So that could be a shortage of work. You would then have to offer the position back to the person. So it might be a construction industry example. You're waiting for that next job. You do an actual layoff. You'd still give notice if you could, but no penalties, no cost to you. The employee can go and find something else, or they can wait around, go on employment insurance, wait around, and come back to you. If you get to the end of that 13 weeks and you don't have work back, then you are moving into the termination piece. And for terminations, we're talking, a without cause termination is really when it's to no fault of the employee. So they didn't do anything wrong. You just actually have a shortage of work, or you need to restructure your business. And, this is really when the role no longer exists. It's a permanent reduction in your workforce, and it would require notice or payment in lieu of notice. So all those great things about like the process, making sure you're doing some work on understanding it, planning your approach is really important, having a really good conversation. We just don't have that need to consult, which is quite an interesting variation between the two. I know it is a lot easier here. It doesn't mean you shouldn't do it right, and it doesn't mean that those severance amounts aren't more complicated, but definitely don't have the duty to consult here. So very quickly, you know, the hard part about downsizing your organization is when you get to that point and you're actually having those conversations, whether it be the consultative conversation or the conversation around the actual termination conversation, right? So, you know, I really recommend that you're writing out a script for yourself. I've done plenty of these conversations and I still have a script. I'm very comfortable with what I want to say, but I want to make sure I don't miss anything. I want to make sure that I'm not rambling, that I'm to the point, and that I'm very clear. I think you owe your employees that when you have to have this difficult conversation. You want to lead with empathy, but really be business focused, right? So a very short, tight script on what you need to share with them. Stick to the script, you know, be clear on the next steps. So if it's a consultative process, what are your next steps? If it's the actual termination, what is the expectation that the employee will leave then? How will they leave? What will the final pay look like if there is final pay? All of those pieces. And then in all 3 countries, we're going to provide those details in writing. It just might look a little bit different, but it can be made. Often people will say after they've worked with us, they go, I was so nervous about that, but it went so much better than I thought it was going to. Or, you know what, the employee understood. I was just so glad that I could do that in a professional way and had it all wrapped up. The worst is when you haven't planned for it. It's a really scattered conversation. There's no follow-up. That's when things get really tense and you start having people talk about lawyers and, you know, what they're going to do. And there's a lot of aggravation there. So the planning piece is really important there. And then the last piece is, you know, telling the wider team. So I've seen this done so many times where people just disappear off Slack or they just don't come into work anymore. And the rest of the team is really left wondering because it's another difficult conversation to have, right? So you've already done the difficult conversation of talking to the employee you're letting go, and then you just sort of hope no one will notice. Well, we don't recommend that. We highly recommend that you, again, plan for the conversation. You know, you don't want that trust to be eroded. You don't want that gossiping to happen. You don't want people to make up their own mind about what it's going to be like without that person or how you treated that person. So, you know, it's about being as honest as you can about where the business is at, you know, sharing your plan for stabilizing or driving the business forward, asking the team for support, ideas, and involvement. So this in Canada and Australia and New Zealand would really be another part of consultation, right? So and you might have had this conversation earlier before you get to the point of having let people go, is giving them a heads up that things are challenging in the business. You know, focus on the roles and the go forwards, right? So what's happening moving forward, and you want to, you know, protect the privacy of the leavers by giving minimal personal details. So you're not going to be say, don't worry, they took it really well, they're going on vacation, right? So you're going to keep it really tight in terms of, you know what, they're no longer here, we really wish them well. You know, you're welcome to reach out personally if you had a relationship with them, those types of things. So yeah, does anyone have anything else to add there? Great. So we'll just leave you with our few key takeaways and then we'll open up the conversation here, right? So, you know, basically, you know, no matter what state you're in, take time, consider where the business is at. And that might be something you do quarterly. It might be something you do as the actual year, your financial year comes to an end. You know, where are you at? Consider the data and understand whether that does need to affect your headcount. Times for growth require planning. So all those pieces that Karen provided you with around what kind of roles do you need, what extra resources, you know, how will you make time for the development and integrating those people in. Periods of steady state need maintenance. So as we talked about, right, keeping your eye on the ball, having those conversations with your employees, being engaged in what does steady state look like. It doesn't mean you're not growing in technology, in customer service. It might just not be a big growth place. And then downsizing, right? Done right. If you do it right with focus and attention and empathy, you can really still keep your culture strong and can really respect those people that, you know, are leaving your organization. Those is kind of the summary of our key takeaways. Anything on the panel, anything else anyone wants to add, or should we just go straight to Q&A? Karen, anything to add, or Tristan, Nicole?
I just think one thing to Nicole's point is that case law can change, and we are here to help. That's why we're here. And so we're across that, so you don't have to be. So it's worthwhile just checking to make sure that if there have been changes since the last time you did a change, that you're aware of what they might look like.
Great point, Karen. Nicole's slide actually triggered a recollection for me around case law, and that redeployments in New Zealand must also consider opportunities if you've got if you're in a organisation working across the Tasman, you also have to consider opportunities that may be available in any of your Australian areas as well as New Zealand for redeployment, which is quite an upheaval for most people, but it's what we've got to do. Thank you.
Awesome. So a couple of questions coming in, and I'm hoping we'll see a few more now. Feel free to ask any questions you have, and let us know the country if that's helpful. Tristan, there are a couple there. Do you want to read those out and ask, or summarize them? And
yeah, okay. Sure. The first questions come in asking for any comments in relation to sudden disruption resulting in permanent or temporary impact to a workplace or workforce. And the examples could be severe weather events or natural hazards, either short-term or long-term, as we've seen happen across all countries. Does the processes that we've talked to today that we've advocated today still apply, or is there something else we should consider?
That's a good question.
I'm happy to answer from New Zealand perspective, just to start us off, and perhaps any deviation from there you can emphasise, Nicole and Julie. If there isn't permanent change, but there is temporary change to an organisation, there are some different processes to follow, and they are largely driven by the contractual provisions in the employment agreements. I would recommend, if there's temporary disruption, you do seek advice, because it's not the same as the permanent change consultation process in New Zealand.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I'd just quickly add to that, yeah, spot on for Australia. There's things like stand downs. If you recall with the pandemic, if there was, a temporary close of we're closing a service or we're not going to operate for a couple of weeks during a shutdown period, there's a stand down process, which is different to what we've talked about today. And then you're obviously working your way through a bespoke planning situation for how you're going to manage that and how you're going to manage to bring people back. However, if this leads to a longer term downsizing, then what we've talked about today is applicable. But yeah, temporary versus long term changes the process a bit.
Yeah, and in Canada, same, we have a layoff provision in our employment standards that would speak really clearly to, that temporary sort of reduction in work. But we do also, work with our businesses to include specific clauses in the employment agreement where weather it does impact. So lots of seasonal businesses where weather does impact, we actually put an extra explicit clause in there about, shortage of work due to weather or different pieces, just for that added level of protection and clarity. Great.
We have a request here for a checklist to work from in terms of expansion or transition. I think we've got a couple of guides that we have available via MyHR. The person who has asked this question, if you'd like to email us at help@myhr.works, we can then accommodate and provide you with a checklist for sure. As businesses go through periods of growth or downsizing, staff can experience burnout due to increased workloads, uncertainty, or change fatigue. What strategies do we recommend for identifying and supporting staff who may be experiencing burnout, and what advice can leaders give to help them recover and stay engaged? That's a big question.
It is a big question. It is a really big question. And I think, some of us are great at change and we really love change. Working in an organization that's a steady state might be more stressful than working where there is lots of change going on. But admittedly, there are lots of people that do get really burnt out of the change or get burnt out of juggling all of those balls and trying to hold things together. my advice would be to, like I say, get really clear on where the juggling is happening and where the extra work is coming from and what is that extra work, right? So sometimes we do things because we've always done them. So a great opportunity to figure out what work is being done. I'm a massive fan of, regular check-ins with your employees. So, that's the conversation about how are things going for you? What are you enjoying about your role? What are you really struggling with and how can I help? And when there is that feeling of burnout, it is trying to get to that bottom of, where is that burnout coming from, right? So where is the frustration? Where is the fatigue? And where is that burnout coming from? Yeah, I think there's tons of opportunity in those conversations to try and figure it out. I mean, sometimes burnout can be coming from just not having time with your manager to ask questions or get support, right? So it can just be having a conversation that really does help that burnout piece there for sure. Yeah, I think I think having some goals and objectives that are clear, or a story about where the business is going and what the plan is with the business to stabilize or to where the change sort of ends or where you're heading to can also be really helpful. Anyone have anything else to add to that one?
I think also it's important to identify when the burnout is a mixture of life and work. Not everybody has a stable state on their work-life balance as well. And as leaders, we need to just be prepared for that and make sure that we can identify when it's work-related versus things that might be happening out in somebody's personal life.
Yeah, great.
Absolutely.
Time for one last question, Julie?
Yeah, you got one more there?
Yeah, I do. How can we best support managers who are asked to lead a downsizing process when they personally disagree with the decision or when it comes as a direct instruction from their CEO?
Yeah, do you want me to answer that, Tristan?
Yeah, go on.
That is really, really challenging. And I think, the most challenging part of that is you often know what's going on before the employees know what's going on. So you're carrying this heavy burden of like having after work drinks on a Friday with someone that's on a list, or that's being considered for downsizing. And there's just no way around like the feeling of that, right? And also difficult when you don't agree. And right. So I think, the best option is ask lots of questions to try and understand the perspective of why the downsize is necessary, respectfully share your thoughts and opinions on what other options are. And reach out to, a mentor if you can, or a coach, or, don't hold that, keep that information as confidential as you can, but gather some support around that, right? Whether it can be someone that is, like a mentor or someone where you can confidentially share. You don't have to share the person's name because it can be a burden to carry, and it can be a very difficult piece. So yeah, seek for more clarification about what's actually going on, so you have all the understanding you need, and don't carry that burden alone if possible. Tristan, anyone have anything to add there?
I think it's just that transparency that you're describing as well. It's like if that leader may not have bought into that change yet, it may be that there's still some work to be done to help them understand it, because then that might also help support the communication that happens to the team as well. Making sure they have the right support to communicate, because sometimes it's not that the business decision itself, it is the feeling of interacting with people with such a heavy story. So helping to them to process and work through that, making sure there is really clear rationale, being as transparent as possible around it. But just acknowledging as well that you understand they may not agree with the way forward. It's okay that they disagree. What we do need is their support and leadership role to move this thing forward. So we are asking them to act in a leadership role. And sometimes leadership roles we do have to do hard things. That's the nature of the role. So just making sure that the expectations are clear and the support is clear as well.
Yeah, and Karen, I think, when you do provide people with a very clear script and really talk about how it's going to go and what support, I do find that, sometimes that really helps people, right? They kind of feel a lot better about it if you tell them not just what needs to happen, but they have the support on how that's going to happen and how it's going to be done. That brings us to our end of our webinar, right on 5 o'clock, and all the question answered. So we've got to feel good about that. Well, 5 o'clock here, not 5 o'clock in Australia, brings us to 5 o'clock here. So thank you all so much for attending our webinar today and staying diligently on the call. We will be emailing out our slides today, and please don't hesitate to reach out to MyHR if there's any support that you can need, or K3, because both organizations would love to help you with your people management pieces. Anything else to say, ladies?
Thank
No,
you.
thank you everyone for joining.
Thank
Hope
you.
you enjoyed it.
Yeah, fantastic.
Thank you
I'll
for
just
having
leave
us, Julie, Karen, Tristan. It's been fun, the 4 of us on here. When are we doing this again? What's our next
Yeah.
topic? Site
Yeah,
safety
exactly.
and speaking up when you disagree with a decision.
Yeah,
Yeah,
nice.
exactly. Difficult conversations. I mean, I think that's always a really good one.
Yes, crucial conversations. That'd be great.
Exactly, exactly. Fantastic. Well, I'll just let the group leave, and then we'll end the webinar here. But thank you all very much for attending. There's some email addresses should anyone need to send us an email.